We have a call to order, Sarah. Roll call.
Yes, I'll start the roll call with Councilmember Beckmeyer.
Present.
Councilmember Vaterlas.
Here.
Councilmember O'Neill.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Big Stick.
Present.
Mayor Beer.
Here. Okay, we'll read the land acknowledgement. The City of Pacifica acknowledges that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We honor the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples for their enduring commitment to Mother Earth. As the indigenous protectors of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as caretakers of this place, as well as for all people who reside in their traditional territory. We affirm their sovereign rights as First People and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. We will now salute the flag led by Councilmember O'Neill.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all.
Sarah, do you have some information to share with our community?
Yes, I'll make a few announcements about tonight's meeting format. Tonight's meeting format will be held by video conference with no physical location, open to the public pursuant to the provisions of Government Code Section 54953 as amended by AB 361, which authorizes teleconference meetings under the Brown Act during certain proclaimed states of emergency. The public can observe and participate in the meeting via the Zoom link provided in the agenda or by phone to the dial-in number and webinar ID provided in the agenda. This meeting may also be observed on Comcast channel 26 or online at www.cityofpacifica.org/live stream. For this meeting, live verbal public comments may be made through Zoom. Use the raise hand button to indicate that you wish to speak on the agenda item when the mayor calls upon public comment for that item. For those participating by phone, use *9 to raise your hand to speak and *6 to unmute once called upon. The city clerk will call upon speakers at the appropriate time and allow each to unmute after calling them on by screen name or the last 4 digits of your phone number if you're dialing in. Please clearly state your full name for the record at the start of your comment. This is a special meeting and public comments will be taken only for the item on the agenda. Written and email public comments will not be read during the meeting, but will be made part of the written record and were provided to council members and posted on the city's website for those comments that were received by noon today. The format of this meeting may be altered or the meeting may be canceled if needed. You may check on the status of the meeting by visiting the city's website at www.cityofpacifica.org for any updates.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So tonight we have a recommended action to receive a presentation and provide direction regarding further analysis of reach code options. And we have with us tonight Planning Director Christian Murdoch to present.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and honorable council members. I am pleased to be here tonight to discuss briefly the 2022 California Building Code update and more specifically, the opportunity for the City Council to consider adoption of reach codes. The agenda for tonight has 5 categories on the screen here. I'll start with introduction of our presenters and meeting objectives, and then work through details about the various components of the 2022 Building Code, 2019 Reach Codes adopted by City Council, and opportunities to consider 2022 Reach Codes. The presenters tonight will primarily be me, the Planning Director, Christian Murdoch. I am joined also by Public Works Director, Elisa Peterson, who's available to answer any questions that may come up with respect to city-owned facilities. I'm also joined by Doug Ryder of CSG Consultants, who is the former building official for the City of Pacifica and assisted the city in the 2019 Reach Code adoption process. And I'm also thrilled to be joined by partners from Peninsula Clean Energy and their consultants. We have Blake Hershoft of Peninsula Clean Energy, as well as Myra Vega of TRC, which is a consultant to Peninsula Clean Energy. Tonight's meeting has two objectives. The first is to discuss REACH code opportunities as part of the 2022 California Building Code, or CBC update, and then to obtain City Council direction on whether and how to proceed with preparing for adoption of REACH codes. There will be a variety of key terms used tonight. If there's a question at any point as to the meaning or the difference between terms, by all means, please stop me or our consultants that have joined us to seek clarification, because we do want to ensure that the council and the public understand the content that we're covering tonight. I'll start by introducing one key term, the California Building Code, or CBC. I'm using that term generally. As indicated in the staff report, there are various parts of the California Building Code. The Green Building Code and the Energy Code are the two most important for the REACH codes, but I'm using the term broadly as CBC is an umbrella term to address all of the components of the building code. And tonight we will seek City Council direction on the 4 questions presented in the staff report and shown on the screen. I will go into detail and reiterate these later. I just want to plant the seed for these to be in the minds of the council members as we move through the information in the presentations, that we will be coming back to these 4 questions. So to begin, let me summarize what the building code process involves. It's a process the city is required to go through every 3 years under state law. It involves adoption of the statewide model code, which is the 2022 California Building Code, or CBC.
Your PowerPoint.
Yep,
And-
Christian,
You don't
Yeah,
have
thanks.
PowerPoint.
Thanks. I did not begin sharing my screen. Thanks for holding.
That's all good.
All right. So here are the 4 questions, most importantly, that the City Council will be asked to address later in the presentation. And moving on now to where I was in the slides, and thanks again for stopping me. The building code update is a process the city is required to go through every 3 years under state law to adopt the model statewide code, which is the 2022 California Building Code that I've mentioned already. The city also has the opportunity, and has in years past, adopted local amendments to the California Building Code. They address local climatic, topographic, and geographic conditions that are unique to Pacifica and require deviations from the model code adopted and prepared by the state. And then the adoption, importantly, must be effective by January 1st of 2023, and it will cover the subsequent 3 calendar years before we get into the next triennial or 3-year code adoption cycle. The City Council adopted REACH codes as part of the 2019 California Building Code update. Among the other local amendments the City Council adopted were so-called REACH codes. That's the main topic of discussion for tonight. And REACH codes are local amendments that exceed the Energy Code and/or Green Building Code requirements in the statewide model code. The intent for those local amendments is to achieve additional energy efficiency or other enhancements to the basic requirements in the model code. And the REACH codes adopted by the City Council in 2019 applied to new buildings only. Among the REACH codes adopted by the City Council, we'll briefly work through those, and we can come back as required to help answer the 4 questions presented by staff. The first among the REACH codes was to require all new buildings to be all electric. Exceptions adopted by the City Council included residential buildings to allow them to have non-electric, i.e. gas, cooking appliances and fireplaces. Non-residential buildings containing a for-profit restaurant open to the public for specified business-related reasons were allowed to include gas-fueled cooking appliances. Accessory dwelling units, or ADUs of all types, including detached, attached, and conversions of existing space, were allowed an exception from the REACH code requirements for electrification. And lastly, public agency owned and operated emergency centers were also accepted. Those accepted buildings other than restaurants, however, were required to pre-wire for electrical utilities, which is to say they are required to install the circuit, the wiring, and the outlet in the area where the gas-powered appliance was installed, so that future electrification or replacement with an electrical appliance could occur without further electrical retrofits. And the standard energy code requirement, the standard energy code in the 2019 CBC did not require electrification for new buildings. The next REACH code adopted by the City Council in 2019 was the requirement for photovoltaic or PV, i.e. solar panel installations for new non-residential buildings other than healthcare facilities with 3 habitable stories or fewer, hotel and motel occupancies, and high-rise multifamily buildings with 10 habitable stories or fewer. The standard 2019 California Building Code required PV installation for only some buildings, and those were new low-rise residential buildings, including single-family dwellings and multifamily dwellings with 3 habitable stories or less. REACH code opportunities for 2022 that the City Council can consider. Before we do that, I should say, it's important to understand what the baseline will be upon adoption of the 2022 California Building Code. There are many new provisions that enhance energy efficiency of new buildings compared to the 2019 Building Code. Those include establishing heat pumps as the prescriptive baseline for residential space heating in Pacifica, i.e. if you install an electric heat pump, you don't have to do further electrical or energy calculations. That's what the meaning of the prescriptive baseline is. The 2022 Building Code will establish battery storage readiness requirements for residential buildings and battery storage installation requirements for non-residential buildings that are required to install photovoltaic panels. The code will establish a level 2 electric vehicle or EV charger capable space requirement for 1 parking space per dwelling unit for single family and 2 family homes. And then I'll let the last bullet speak for itself. There's a lot of numbers and proportions there, but essentially it establishes expanded electric vehicle charging parking space requirements for multifamily residential off-street parking spaces. And we can dive into those details later if the council is so interested. And so the opportunities for REACH codes in 2022 fall into 3 general categories that we've identified. The first is to verify or modify the existing REACH codes from 2019. The second is to consider whether additional REACH code options for new buildings are appropriate and desired by the City Council. And then to consider whether REACH codes should be applied to existing buildings, which is generally speaking a much more complicated and detailed process to consider the different thresholds. I outlined some of those considerations in the staff report, and we can circle back to those later in City Council discussion. At this point, I want to turn over the presentation to Blake and to Myra. They are going to go through a number of slides to cover a range of options, background information on building electrification, cost considerations, and other details of potential REACH code options for the City Council. Again, at any point, if there are questions, please do stop the presenters so we can answer that question on the spot or make note of it and come back later for a more detailed explanation. Blake or Myra?
Myra, I believe you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Blake, did you want to say anything before I get started with the presentation?
No, go for it. Thank
All
you,
right.
Myra.
Quick question, Christian, is this slide deck a PDF or PowerPoint?
It is a PDF.
Okay, so I do have some animation. Is it possible to share my screen? Those animations are disabled on PDF.
Sure, it'll take a moment for the city clerk to make you a co-host, and then I will stop sharing, and then you can pull up your slides, and I'll jump back in when you get to the end of your presentation.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for being flexible. All right, so let me get situated here.
Ms. Vega, you should now be able to share your screen.
Great, thank you. Okay, I believe you all can see my screen. Okay, great. All right, so as Christian mentioned, my name is Myra Vega. I am a senior project manager at CRC, and I'm here on behalf of the Bay Area REACH Codes Initiative and Peninsula Clean Energy. Now, Pacifica, as you saw, does have an existing REACH code, so mostly what I'll be talking about today is what our recommendations are for the 2022 code cycle, both for building electrification and EV charging infrastructure. And also have a slide on Pacifica's exceptions. So I would like to spend a few minutes just to provide some additional information about those exemptions for your consideration as you explore which ones to consider removing or keeping. I think Christian did a great job of laying out what REACH codes are. So I will skip this slide. And this is really just provides a high level overview of what's happening throughout the state. So we can see several cities and counties within California have been actively pursuing and adopting and implementing REACH codes. And the reason why I'm here today is because we really are encouraging member agencies to adopt a REACH code for the 2022 code cycle well before the end of this year, so that there isn't an enforcement gap between your current REACH code and your next REACH code. So just showing where we're at in the adoption timeline here. So as I mentioned, I'll be talking about providing some background on benefits of electrification and cost effectiveness very briefly, and really spending the majority of my presentation on what our recommendations are. So in addition to being able to drastically reduce our carbon emissions as our grid becomes cleaner by targeting building and transportation electrification, building and transportation, also particularly building electrification. All electric buildings are generally cheaper to build, and they're also healthier to live and to work in. So a couple other benefits to building electrification aside from the carbon benefits. Also, several studies have pointed out that building electrification and transportation electrification will lead to some job growth here in the immediate future. So this is an infographic that we recently updated. This is also on our website, bayareareachcodes.org. And really the point here is for a new single family home in the Bay Area, all electric with solar, a solar PV system that's bigger than what's minimally required from the state is cost effective overall. And we can see here, you can look at the different end uses and see what the cost comparison is between the electric option and the gas option. But generally what we recommend is all electric plus additional solar to really get the bang for your buck. So I'll go over some EV charging terms. I'll provide some background on our EV research and go over some terms before I go into our recommended EV codes. So as you all probably know, by 2035, we're not going to be able to purchase new gas internal combustion engine vehicles anymore. So there is obviously a demand growing for EV charging infrastructure. And the REACH codes are really a powerful vehicle for us to be able to do that. And also one of the reasons we really encourage EV charging infrastructure at time of construction is to minimize those high retrofit costs later in the future. As you can see on the right side here, PG&E estimates about $18,000 per port for installing a port at retrofit. So now I'll be getting into our REACH code recommendations. And I think Christian did a really good job of also outlining what's going to change in this next code cycle. A couple things I want to add is there's also going to be higher ventilation rates for gas stoves. On the non-res, water or space heating is going to be the prescriptive baseline for most building types, in addition to the residential buildings as well.
What do you mean a higher ventilation rate for gas stoves? Define that, please?
So I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but the equipment is going to require the gas, the fume hood is going to require higher CFM. Did that answer your question? I don't have the.
And Myra,
exact
cubic feet per minute, the volume of air that it moves per unit of time needs to be higher, right? Essentially a stronger blower.
Yeah.
Okay, so like the existing hoods and stuff that are on over range hoods and stuff isn't going to pass the new building codes?
It's specifically if you choose to use a gas range, which, so when you cook, the emissions that'll be in the breathing zone would be from the food that you cook and maybe that smokes a little bit. And then also if you're using gas, you also have 20% of the gas that you're trying to burn just escapes without being burned. So the new energy code requires a higher ventilation rate for if you install a gas stove than if you were to put an electric stove in the same location.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Mike. And on the existing building side, we'll see some of the similar push for heat pumps as well, for restricting electric resistance heating and making retrofits for heat pump retrofits simpler to comply with. Okay, so now I'm going to get into
You don't mention water heaters. Are they coming up?
What's your question about the water heaters?
Well, you just had this slide that shows heat pumps. Oh, okay. I just saw climate zone 12. Okay. What about what climate zone is Pacifica in, and what are the carrot and the stick approaches for water heating?
What is the carrot and stick approach for water heating?
Right. You have some carrots, and then you also have some sticks for for the different choices. And I was just, what is climate zone 12? Is that what Pacifica is in?
Pacifica's in climate zone 3. So in new construction, really good question. In new construction, the new energy code, so this is not the REACH code, but just the energy code, pushes you towards using a heat pump for space heating by making it a baseline in an energy modeling exercise that happens in new construction. They also require pre-wiring, so that's a bit of a stick there. So if you decide to put in a gas water heater, you have to wire for the electric water heater. I think the hope from the Energy Commission there is that if you're already going to run a wire, maybe you would just also install the heat pump water heater at that point. But our recommendation for the REACH code would be to actually require that water heater to be electric as well. Does that answer your question, council member?
Yeah. I just was, when I was reading this slide, I missed the water heating.
Yeah, it's hard to see there.
So I saw all the others, but I missed that one. And then you did answer the question about zone 3, zone 4, or whatever.
All right. Thanks again, Blake. Thanks for your question. Okay. So that was what we can expect from the state code effective January 1st, 2023. What I'm going to be talking about now is what we actually, as part of the REACH codes team, what we actually recommend. And essentially what we're recommending for new buildings is that they go all electric. This is essentially the REACH code that Pacifica already has, with a few exceptions. And we do have exceptions for infeasibility. And generally what that means is that there isn't a compliance pathway. there isn't a way for an all-electric design for a specific building to meet code. If that is the case, we have exceptions for that. And what we really encourage is if there are any infeasibility waivers that come in, that cities at least require the builder to put in pre-wiring, and you guys currently have that in your REACH code right now. So none of these are particularly new. This is pretty standard stuff that we've been recommending, and it lines up pretty much with what Pacifica has right now. And I see a hand raised. Do we? Yeah. Do we want to take that now?
Yeah, sure. We might as well, right? Study session.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Councilmember Beckmeyer.
What does the first line, extension of any existing gas infrastructure, mean?
So let's say, oh, this is new construction. I was thinking about existing buildings. So if there's a development on a piece of land that already has gas infrastructure and the home itself is required to be all electric, they also can't extend that gas line to any external uses, like let's say a pool heater, a gas barbecue.
So that's for new construction on property that already has existing buildings.
I'm thinking of a situation where it's in, I don't know if this is applicable here, but infill development where there's some infrastructure already there. That's the best example that I can come up with right now to explain that.
Councilmember Beckmeyer, so for example, let's just say there's a small dilapidated home, it's completely demolished and an entirely new building is constructed. That site might already have gas infrastructure beyond the property line, right from the public right of way into the property. It served the old building, but you may not be able to extend that gas infrastructure to any new connection, any new piping to service the new building that's being constructed. Similarly, if the building had been demolished sometime in the past and the vacant property is now being developed at this point in the future, similar limitations on extending gas infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
So does that also mean like probably 90% of the houses of Pacifica have gas? If they want to put an ADU in the backyard, then they cannot extend the gas space heating or water heating or anything to the ADU. Is that what that also means?
Without an ADU exception, yes.
Right now we have an ADU exception.
That's right, yeah. So under the current code, you could extend the gas to the ADU, but I have a slide where I'm going to provide some additional information about all electric construction for ADUs for your consideration. But in the event, or if you decide to remove that ADU exemption, then yes, you wouldn't be able to extend that gas line from home to the ADU.
Okay.
Right, good question.
Go for it. I think the questions are done for now.
All right. If I don't see them, just stop me.
I will.
All right. So I'm going to move on. We're going to talk about the exemptions now. So for cooking and fireplaces, that is one of the exemptions that you guys have in your current REACH code. Just highlighting that gas cooking has been linked to health hazards. And it's probably what motivated those higher ventilation rates for the fume hoods for a gas stove in the new code cycle. There are also options for all electric fireplaces. There's also an exemption for public emergency centers. I think I was looking at this a couple days ago, and the exemption that I mentioned about having an infeasibility exemption, might be able to cover a variety of different building types that might benefit from this, from having this exemption available if they can't meet compliance with an all-electric design. So you could potentially widen the pool of buildings, building types that might be exempted, but narrow down the actual number of buildings that might actually end up being exempted, because they would have to demonstrate that they just don't have a pathway for compliance. So that's one alternative to this exemption for your consideration.
You have a question?
Yes.
Yes. And this actually might be a question better suited for city staff, because public emergency center is kind of an abstract. I was wondering if city staff maybe could give me an idea. Do we currently have public emergency centers? I appreciate we're talking about exemptions in new development. And so I would imagine from city staff, are there certain public emergency centers we might be building in the conceivable future?
Mayor Potem, I am going to check to see if we actually have a definition of this term. I think the working understanding I have is that it would apply, for instance, to our Emergency Operations Center, or EOC. It's a critical piece of infrastructure where the city needs to be able to operate and have all of the relevant utilities operating under a variety of circumstances. And so I think the exception would apply at minimum to the Emergency Operations Center that's at the police station.
And I would add, I'm wondering if it would also apply to the community center, which is we're under agreement with as a comfort center during heat waves or other electricity outages.
Okay, so thank you. That helps me have a better idea of what we currently have built. And so as I'm thinking in terms of, because these are new construction exemptions, is my understanding as I'm reading this, and would love to get rid of probably every exemption I can, but especially when it comes to public safety, are there examples of public emergency centers that might be built in the future for which then I can weigh my desire to start eliminating exemptions against the needs that the city might have?
We have one other question.
On the same topic, what about fire stations and libraries?
Was that a question for me or for council?
Anyone? Anyone. I mean, are they considered emergency centers? I know libraries have been in terms of evacuation and in cooling centers.
Yeah, I think that goes back to Christian's comment about looking up the definition for public emergency centers, because, I mean, what we don't want to do is, remove any emergency centers, any safe havens, any critical infrastructure that needs to run for the sake of going all electric. We want to make sure that these buildings are able to continue to run and operate. So I think it comes down to how we're defining public emergency centers. But I would agree that if you're using libraries as a shelter, that they need to remain operable. And I'll wait for Christian to report back on how it's defined for the city.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I know there are some exemptions because of the education department. Mike can weigh in on this, I'm sure, but I wonder too about school district facilities and school district office, for example, in terms of, again, evacuation centers, et cetera.
Sure, and I do not see a definition in the 2019 Energy Code for emergency center. So I think we may be working with just a common understanding, and the council certainly would have discretion to create that definition in its adoption of a reach code or a relevant exception for 2022.
And the only reason, we don't mean to belabor the point. I just want you to understand our facilities in Pacifica are old. And so well, again, as Mayor Pro Tem pointed out, we're talking about new construction here, but the fact of the matter is we live with very old public infrastructure in Pacifica and have to really consider these issues. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we got a couple more to get through, but for ADUs, similar to what I showed you all on the infographic for cost effectiveness of a single family dwelling unit. ADUs are cost effective on bill if they include more solar than what is required by the state. And this cost effectiveness report, I'll have to get the link, but it was just released. So these are this conclusion is based off the most updated numbers. And then there's also an exception for commercial kitchen appliances. So again, this could be captured under that exemption for there not being a compliance pathway. It just, depends on how you might want to structure those exemptions. I personally like that exemption because, again, I think it would broaden the scope of the types of buildings that could fall under this exemption, but it would really limit the scope, and a developer, an applicant would have to demonstrate that there is not an applicable pathway for them if they were to go all electric. And then again, keeping that electric readiness requirement for exemptions will really keep those retrofit costs low in the future for, if and when you start exploring existing building measures. Yeah, any other questions on the exemptions? Okay. So Christian, how much time do I have left? I know we had questions, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
We have a lot of time.
And Myra,
Okay.
I haven't been keeping track. It's really up to the mayor if she feels like we need to move along or not.
Okay, great.
No worries. Please, we need all the information we can get.
All right, great.
We did a little slower, probably, quite frankly.
All right, good to know. So I'll actually be going through some terminologies here before we go into the recommended EV codes. So this is a great slide to ask questions on before we get into the actual recommendations. So when we talk about EV code terminology and reach codes, there's two sets of terms that I like to point out. One is associated with the speed of the charger. So when we talk about level 1, level 2, level 3, we're talking about how quickly the car can charge. So level 1 is the most basic level of EV charging. This takes a standard 120 volt outlet. So, for someone that has an EV charger, I think they typically get these level 1 chargers from the car manufacturer, and this just plugs into their outlet in their garage. 3 to 4 miles per charging hour. This is usually enough, assuming an overnight charge for most people's commutes, from the 30 to 50 mile range. Level 2 is a little bit more power. This does require a 240 volt outlet. So there would be some, retrofits required in older homes, at least, to be able to accommodate a level 2 charger. And level 3s are those DC fast chargers, the ones that you see in the parking lots at Target. So those are all on the speed of the chargers. The other category is on the level of infrastructure that is installed So when we say EV capable spaces, what we mean is there are parking spaces that have panel space allocated and raceways, whether it's conduit and commercial or multifamily developments or Romex in a home. There is a path for the circuit to be installed. And by requiring EV capable spaces, a lot of times what you're doing is eliminating the need to tear into any walls in the future to retrofit a building to include EV charging. For EV ready spaces, this actually has the full circuit installed with the breaker, with the receptacle. And so you can see in the little icon here, it has the receptacle. It's hard to, can't really make out the fact that the circuit is installed, but that is part of the EV ready space. And then when we say EVCS, that's an EV charging station, it means that the charger is installed and the car is ready to just be hooked up and charge the battery. And just a little legend here for the next slides. We are using a lot of pie charts. So what we're referring to on those pie charts are the percent of parking spaces. And I'll define that a little bit more on the next slide as well.
Okay, question in regarding the charging stations. Is it like a universal charger head that goes in, or is it like VHS and, or is it like VHS and beta? They aren't compatible.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we get into the specifics of the type of chargers that we're requiring the developer to install, and I think we're leaving it to the developer's discretion as to what kind of cars they expect will charge at their building. What you'll see in our recommendations, we mostly require EV readiness. We do for single family. We do quite a bit for multifamily and some for non-res. And the EV charging, requiring the full EV charging station, we do require some of that in multifamily to extend beyond what the state code is requiring, because the state is going to require some level of EV charging stations installed this next code cycle. I don't really have a good answer for you just yet.
Okay. On this one. So we do not have a specific requirement as to, so when it's a EV ready circuit, it just means the outlet's there. So you can buy EV charging stations that plug into that outlet from multiple manufacturers. Neither the energy code nor our model code specifies a type, but it would always be our recommendation to use a universal charger. And that's typically what we see developers install if they install a charging station. Tesla's the main proprietary charger, but Teslas do accept the universal standard plug type, CCS. So that would be our general recommendation, but we don't list the plug type that has to be used within the code.
That was my question. Is there, is there some way that everybody they're compatible? Do you know what I mean? Like you carry your cord in it, you plug into the station that fits your car type of thing. So you answer my question. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. That was great questions, Councilmember O'Neill. All right, so we do have recommended EV charging reach codes for single family, multifamily, and new construction. What I'm showing here is our recommendation for single family. And what you'll see on the left side is, well, the side's a little different because the 2019 and the 2022 CalGreen requirements are one and the same. They didn't change. But what you should see is a progression of what the state is requiring. And then on the right side, you'll see what our recommendation is in response to the new code requirements. So for single family, the state just requires one parking space be level 2 EV capable. And so again, that's just having the raceway available for a circuit to be installed in the future. What we are recommending is to have one level 2 EV ready circuit and one level 1 EV ready circuit.
Who is we recommending? Who's
So-
we?
That's a good question. So when I say we in this context, I'm talking about the REACH code team. So Peninsula Clean Energy, all the CCAs represented on the slide, East Bay Community Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, collectively as the team that is putting these recommendations together is the we.
And Councilmember O'Neill, it doesn't at this point in time reflect a city staff recommendation. This is information for the city council to decide at some point what the city's position ought to be on these particular issues.
I see a hand raised.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So if we have these level 1 EV2 EV ready circuits, from there, how simple or complex is it to upgrade to a level 3 if one were to want to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't
can answer
know
that one.
Okay.
Upgrading to level 3 would be would likely be very difficult and require, for a single family home, that would require a service upgrade to your house. A level 3 charging station, typically 50 kilowatts. The peak a house will draw in a given year is maybe 10 kilowatts if it has an EV charger. A typical house that provides a 200 amp service to the house would not fit a level 3 charger on it. A level 3 is very rarely used in a residential application.
Thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome.
All right. So I'll move on to the multifamily recommendations. So again, on the left side, you'll see the Cal Green requirements, and on the right side, you will see the REACH code teams and recommended model code. So the biggest change, well, let me take a step back. In the blue text, you'll see, well, the blue box with the text, you'll see the Cal Green pie charts are, what I'm showing there are, they base the requirements on the number of parking spaces. And for the REACH code recommendations, we identify the number are the number of dwelling units with parking spaces. And I'll explain in a little bit what motivated that distinction in the definition. But what the takeaway for what the state's going to require come January 1st for multifamily is that now they're going to require some actual charging stations. So at least 5% of parking spaces will need to have charging stations, along with an increased level of a mix of EV capable and EV ready spaces. What the REACH code team is recommending, what you'll notice is that the entire chart is full. So we are recommending cities to consider 100% access. So meaning every person that lives in a multifamily development would have access to a charger at some point. And there are two options. There is a low power option and a high power option. Low power option includes some mix of level 2 EV chargers and level 1 EV ready spaces. The high power option includes a mixture of level 2 EV chargers and low power level 2 EV ready. And so when we talk about
We have
level
we have a
2,
question. Sorry to interrupt.
oh, yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sue.
Can you define multifamily? I mean, is that 2 units? Is it 5? Is it what's multifamily?
Yeah, so for, yeah, I'm trying to, I don't have the definition off the top of my head. Like, do you have that off the top of your head by any chance?
Well, the previous slide showed single family homes and
And 2.
family townhomes. So my thinking was they mean everything that's not single family homes and 2 family townhomes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember if a 4-plex would be, the 4-plex is a great area for me right now, and I can't remember which category it falls into. I might have to come back to you with that.
I'm pulling that up. I'll pull that up.
Okay, thanks.
While you're looking that up, could you please define ready and capable? Because ready means they're capable of doing it, and capable means it's ready to do it. So what is the difference between ready and capable?
Sure. Yeah, so EV capable, that level of infrastructure just includes the conduit or the raceway and space, reserve space in the panel. It doesn't require a breaker. It doesn't require the actual circuit be installed. An EV ready space does. So an EV ready space has, in addition to having the conduit installed, it also has a circuit installed with the breaker and a receptacle for the charger that can be plugged in the future. Does that answer your question?
I'd forgotten that slide. Now I understand it when you showed the picture. Okay. Thank you.
And
Did the pictures help?
yeah, but also your words help, because what I wrote down that you stated was no need to tear into a wall at EV capable.
Yeah, and that's the case for EV ready as well, and that is, I think, the greatest motivator to install at least EV capable spaces. So even if you're not installing the circuit, you're not putting in the breaker yet, you at least are going to save a future homeowner or a future property owner money, because they're not going to have to tear into any walls, by running the raceways.
Do you have any data on how much it would cost? To make something that's capable to make it ready? I mean, if you're just adding, a couple feet of conduit and a plug, and and then you need to add a circuit breaker, how much are you really talking about? Why not just make it ready right away?
Yes. If you'll notice on our recommendations, we don't recommend any EV capable. The state does have, their minimum requirement is to have EV capable spaces, but what the Reach Code team is recommending is exactly what you stated. It's not going to cost that much more to just run the wires and install the receptacles. You might as well just do it.
While you have the electrician there, especially.
Yeah.
And I have the definition there for the question. I just want to read it exactly. So when we're talking multifamily, we're saying buildings that are bigger than the following: 1 and 2 family dwelling units and townhouses with private garages. So it's really not just about the number of units touching each other, but whether there's a private garage attached to that townhome. In that case, we're saying the single family requirement applies. Every garage will get a 240 volt outlet. And then for multifamily would be anything larger than that. An apartment where you probably walk to a parking space outdoors.
Okay, attached garage. That's a big thing here. Because our townhouses have detached garages.
But we have townhouses that have a private carport, now, what's your definition of a garage, or does each carport then need the unit, the plug?
We had written, and this is up to each city, but we had written private garages to also mean detached private garages. My mother had a townhouse like that at one point in my life, so I know the type of setup you're talking about. When we're talking about carports, it really depends on the size and the scale. Whether you would want to require all those 240 volt chargers for how many units are we talking in such a development?
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking of Creekside, and there must be at least 30, 40 units there. I have no idea how many units there are.
Way more.
More than that.
Yeah, but they
130, I think.
All right, so you have 130 in townhouses that are clustered to townhouses.
Mhm.
They all go outside and walk to a carport, which is assigned to their unit. And all there is basically a roof over it. There's no walls on any side. And then the next question would be, how is that for, who pays for that, and the retrofit and the monthly electric bill?
We're talking about new construction still.
Right.
Sure. But I'm curious about the carport, because that's not a garage. Your definition of a garage versus carport and stuff.
Well, and I
Well,
think
Councilmember O'Neill, I think that these are very important questions, and I think the answer ends up being what the city council thinks is appropriate. What Myra and Blake are talking about is a recommended model ordinance that the Bay Area Reach Code team has put together. And so if it fits, great. If there's something that the city council doesn't like or wants to modify, that's the type of feedback that we can get into to a certain extent tonight, and certainly during the course of any hearing to consider adoption of these requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's going to be super important for us to be able to really understand what it means for Pacifica specifically, like what's that going to look like for our residents, how much it's going to cost, because, every city's different. So
Yeah.
when I was seeing the slide, I was also trying to understand how that would play out in Pacifica.
And I think as I'm thinking about a new development like this, new townhome development, it's going to have a dedicated a dedicated parking spot for each dwelling unit. I mean, to me, that seems to align more with the multifamily definition. And the reason I say that is I think under that situation, it might not be, cost effective at the time of construction to require a charging station at every single parking stall. So the way you're describing it to me seems like it's going to, the multifamily recommendation might fit best. And I'm going to introduce another term, but you'll see at the bottom of the slide, we do encourage automatic load management. So what that would mean is that a charger could potentially charge up to 2 to 4, provide charging for 2 to 4 parking stalls at once. And there's a lot of softwares out there that I communicate with the cars to determine what's the appropriate level of charging for the cars, and what's the appropriate level of sharing across the cars. And that's a strategy to keep construction costs low, while still, providing a suitable level of charging for residents.
And Mayor Beer, so the council knows, as these types of series of questions come up, I am taking notes about the various what ifs that the council thinks up, so that we can determine how best to address these various points, depending how the council wants to move forward.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Load management to me means that like PG&E has premium pricing if you use electricity from 4 to 9, I think it is, right? So would you be able, is there a program or is there a methodology that it doesn't start charging cars, so let's say 9:15, but then will people get the full enough charge to get to Sacramento if they need to? Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah. I think those questions are going to be if a developer wants to pursue automatic load management. It's going to be one of those questions at the design stage, to look at what the different options are.
Wouldn't Peninsula Clean Energy not want everybody charging at 7 o'clock at night? Because Peninsula Clean Energy must have some sort of load management and, high energy usage time that they'd rather have it at 2 a.m. I mean, I would think Peninsula Clean Energy would thinking about load management for their whole system.
So, Councilmember O'Neill, I think you're raising a number of important points about EV charging overall. It's not likely that the reach codes that the City Council will consider will get to that level of refinement in terms of operation of an individual charger and time of day usage. There are charging units, to my understanding, and certainly EV vehicles that you can indicate the time of desired charging. For instance, to manage, a particular home's electrical usage or to achieve the most cost-effective charging time. And so individual operators will have the ability to control their charging. The other dimension of load management that Myra is talking about is making most efficient use of a single charger to charge multiple vehicles. So I think the old-fashioned conventional way, right, of let's just say the first generation would be split 50-50, the power going to 2 vehicles that are plugged into the same time. And that may or may not be the most efficient method to charge the vehicle. Blake can explain further, but there are more efficient ways, or at least alternative ways, to split that power. So you're essentially charging 2 vehicles with only one set of infrastructure for a particular charger.
Okay.
Yes, in this case, automated load management just means it's a way to be able to get more charging ports out of less electrical infrastructure. There's a balance here happening. The preference would be a charging station already installed at every single parking space. And then what you're seeing on the far left with 2019 Cal Green is saying, well, that costs too much electrical infrastructure and the charging stations are incentives. So let's just make some parking spaces level 2 EV capable. Our model code is trying to be a balance by using technology and also different levels of charging to minimize the impact on the costs of site electrical infrastructure while providing charging access to every resident on the day that it's built. And Christian is right that every vehicle I'm aware of, you can set when it charges. Peninsula Clean Energy, so you would set it to start charging at midnight. As long as you didn't have a long drive the next day or if your battery is already pretty full. We would like to get more involved in automated charging and things like that. But first and foremost, it's important that people's cars have the fuel in them that they need to go where they need to go the next day. So that's a sticky situation that you brought up. I hope that helps.
All right. So that's multifamily. And I have some cost data here, just demonstrating the incremental costs and the different options, comparing the state code minimum for the current code cycle, the next code cycle, and then our 2 recommendations on the rates. So, and you'll see in the little green box that these we've estimated is that these costs collectively, all of these options shown here are about 0.3 to 0.5% of the total construction costs. But again, these are real numbers, and so having automated load management as an option is something that cities might also want to explore as well. Keep those EV charging infrastructure costs down. Also, affordable housing new construction is eligible for PCE incentives. So if there's any questions on that, I'm sure Blake can provide some insight there. And then what I'm showing here are the EV charging reach code
I'm
recommendations.
sorry to interrupt. Mary, did you have a question on that last slide?
I think I'm gonna have to go over all the cost-effective slides at the end anyway, so I'd like to come back to them and have them explained more thoroughly. So yeah, I was gonna ask that after. Because there's another slide about cost-effectiveness earlier. I'd also like to take a look at it.
And so you're saying it costs about $2,200 per unit because this is a 100-unit building?
For the, are you looking at the
for the
low power
highest one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, that is right. Okay, so for our non-res recommendations, what you'll see again on the left side, Cal Green requirements, on the right side are the reach code recommendations. So what we currently have, how we have this structured, and it's going to be different for each city's jurisdiction, but we have a recommendation for offices. And so up to at least 50% of their, recommending at least 50% of their parking spaces have some level of level 2 infrastructure. And then for all other non-res, so retail is a big one, having at least 20% of level 2 charging and infrastructure. So the rest of my slide deck is really on resources for you all. What I'm showing here are EV charging incentives, and this is from PCE. And we do have some recommendations for EV infrastructure in existing buildings. I will be honest, existing buildings is a new frontier. So this is definitely an area where we are working closely with cities and counties that are interested in existing buildings. So these recommendations are not uniform recommendations and will be tailored to individual jurisdictions. But essentially what we are recommending is that when a new parking facility is added to, I'm sorry, I jumped to multifamily. For single family, any parking additions or electric panel upgrades must meet those new construction requirements of having the 2 parking spaces be one level 2 ready and the other one level 1 ready. For multifamily and non-residential, what we're recommending is when new parking facilities are added or there are upgrades to the electrical system or lighting systems, that 10% of the parking spaces, of the total parking spaces, should have EV charging stations, and that any existing EV capable spaces be upgraded to level 1 EV ready. So again, that means if there's a space that has conduit and space allocated in the panel for a future EV charger, that the developer actually hire an electrician to go in and install the circuit and the breaker and the receptacle. And then our last recommendation here is a time certain policy. So we're recommending that by January 1st, any EV capable spaces be upgraded to level 1 EV ready. I believe you all have the slide deck, so you can reference these sites. We do have quite a bit of industry resources for builders, developers, architects, designers. And that's it from me.
Great. Thanks so much, Myra. It was a really informative presentation. I'm going to switch the screen back to just the final slide or two that I have. And so, as I mentioned earlier, council members, we do have 4 questions we've identified to seek your input. Understanding there may be some additional questions and need to go back to some of the information, and certainly we will need to receive public comment. After all of that, we will want to come back and really drill down on these 4 questions to make sure we get the guidance that we need to move forward on this topic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Christian. Questions, council?
A lot of questions, but I'll wait for public comment.
Sounds good to me. Let's open up public comment, please.
And Madam Mayor, as City Clerk Coffee is getting us set up, I do want to mention for the record, we did receive several written public comments before the meeting tonight, which we've distributed to the council members and posted on the city's website.
Thank you.
Okay, we have several hands raised for public comment. I'm going to share my screen with the timer. And just verifying that we are allowing for 3 minutes per speaker. Is that correct? Okay. So we'll start with public comment from Dashel Leeds, and followed by Remy Tan, and then Bruce Nagel. Dashel, you may go ahead and unmute and begin your comment. Please state your name for the record at the beginning of your public comment.
Thank you. My name is Dashel Leeds. I'm the conservation organizer for the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter. And 3 minutes, woo, I feel like I have time to breathe. This is wonderful. We're really pleased to hear that staff is recommending all electric reach codes for new construction. We agree with staff's approach that removing blanket exemptions and replacing them with infeasibility exemptions is a really excellent way to go forward. Infeasibility or hardship exemptions, they give Pacifica the flexibility to ensure that building uses will continue uninterrupted, while simultaneously ensuring that new fossil gas pipelines are not unnecessarily approved and put into the soil. And this is super, super important because every new gas pipeline that we allow to be built, it's a cost, it's a public health, and it's a climate liability for our city. So as far as leaks go, gas pipelines leak all throughout the entire system. So from extraction to distribution to use in our homes. And what this means is that while it's great to fix the end uses, it's not just the end uses that we ultimately need to electrify. We will need to transition away from the entire gas system eventually. And we are in the early stages of society-wide fuel switching effort. And the writing on the wall is really clear. Gas is on the way out. I've been tracking some recent climate action plans that have come out in the past year in our region from San Jose, Cupertino, City of Santa Clara, and all of them contain measures and goals for the decarbonization of existing buildings. And the CPUC recently voted unanimously to eliminate ratepayer subsidies for the extension of new gas lines. And of course, how could I not mention the Inflation Reduction Act, which may accelerate a lot of green energy production. So we're moving away from gas. Technology and policy is moving really fast, and blanket exemptions risk keeping the door open for more gas in situations where gas is not warranted and counterproductive. So let's go with an all-electric code. Thank you to staff for a great presentation, and thanks to PCE for providing the Bay Area Reach Code's model reach code for new construction, really excellent code. In addition to their model reach code for existing buildings. And speaking of that, we really agree that staff should prepare an item for consideration during fiscal year 2023 to 2024 to study the adoption of a reach code for existing buildings. Let's start planning that as soon as possible. And let's future-proof Pacifica to be in a future without gas, because we're gonna have to be there. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And next, I have Remy Tan. Remy Tan, you may go ahead and unmute and begin your comment.
Hi, this is Remy Tan, Pacific Manor architect, green building consultant. Yeah, I'm glad that the city's looking at the REACH code by the green building task force about 10, 12 years ago, and we had a pretty robust building ordinance, and I'm glad to see the electrification and the EVs are all, being considered right now. I didn't see anything in there about energy conservation, going above and beyond. Energy conservation is, the low reducing, carbon emissions. So I'd like to see that included. And then as far as the solar requirements, solar is getting so inexpensive. I'm looking at even putting a second system on my house because the PG&E rates have gone, up astronomically in the last couple of years. So I think it should be required in every building. We don't have high-rise buildings in Pacifica. When I mean high-rise, over 10 stories. So that should be an automatic requirement. There are incentives out there. For electric, that also should be required. I can't think of any building that would warrant an exception unless it's an existing building and they have limited amount of power from PG&E, capability in the street infrastructure. I would say that may be the only exception, but cooking, I borrowed PG&E's new flat plate cooker, and that thing heats up water faster than a microwave. And my daughter was cooking all kinds of stuff. She said it works as well, if not better than gas, the induction cooktops. So definitely there's no excuse not to do all electric in this day and age. Again, except if the building, the service to the building is inadequate by PG&E. I would say that's the only exception. As far as EV charging, about probably in 2018, 2017, I was working on projects and on the developer side, and we already had a demand from our customers. 30% wanted EV charging, and this is before Ford and General Motors and Hyundai and all the major brands had their longer range electric cars. I mean, there were only Tesla and I think Nissan Leafs out there at that time. So the waiting lists on these cars now are pretty ridiculous. Everybody wants them. So definitely the REACH code should make basically every new parking space accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Rami.
Okay, next I have Bruce Nagel. Bruce Nagel, you may go ahead and unmute to speak.
Sarah, can you also list the following speakers so folks can be prepared? Thank you.
Thank you. Following Bruce Nagel, I have Mauro Myman and then Diane Bailey.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for your enthusiasm, the council's enthusiasm for being able to move ahead and doing on the what we're going to need to do for the future. I would agree with the comments from the last two people that are up here. Dashiell Leeds went through a lot of detail in regards to this. I think it's useful every once in a while to think about why it is we're doing this. And one of the important things that I've run into in many of the council meetings that I've presented is the fact of how important it is for the younger generation. I've seen much of the younger generation going in front of the cities and saying, we absolutely need this because they're the ones who are going to suffer if indeed it doesn't happen. And you have a unique opportunity in Pacifica. You mentioned about the topology of the land, and you're more subject to getting sea level rise than some other places are. So obviously it's important to you to address that. And I guess I'll leave it at that because I think there's a lot that's been said. I think it's important. I think you recognize that it's important. Doing whatever you can to do as much as you can, as soon as you can is important. moving things ahead so that people can retrofit their buildings without having to go through extra expense. All these are going to be key parts of the future. And Pacifica leaping ahead on this will mean that your city is that much better prepared for the future than would be otherwise. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Next, we have Margot Myman, followed by Diane Bailey, and then Christine Bowles. Margot Myman, you may go ahead and speak.
Good evening. This is Margot Myman, and hello, Mayor Beer, City Council members. It's nice to see you all. I want to thank you for taking up the issue of REACH codes tonight. According to the California Energy Commission, California's buildings produce 1/4 of the state's greenhouse gas emissions, making homes and businesses a major factor in climate change. Through the use of building codes, individual municipalities like Pacifica can employ a local solution to the climate crisis. In fact, Bay Area communities are in a unique position since we have access to 100% clean electricity through Peninsula Clean Energy and other community choice aggregates. I believe it's the city's responsibility to take advantage of this opportunity to enact strong REACH codes before the end of the year. I spoke with several of you individually about the need to update Pacifica's 2019 REACH codes regarding new construction to give them more teeth by getting rid of most of the exceptions. I was hoping to hear a little bit more tonight about existing buildings because a more dramatic impact on greenhouse gas emissions would take place by the replacement of gas appliances in existing buildings. So at any case, I want each of you to consider all of the options that are available to the city of Pacifica for decarbonizing buildings, both new and existing. So city staff is asking for direction on 4 different items, and I urge the city council to say yes on all of them. Essentially that yes, staff should prepare REACH code language for new and existing buildings that is based on the model code provided by the Bay Area REACH codes team. It's worth noting that on Thursday last week, the California Air Resources Board announced a ban on new sales of natural gas water heaters and furnaces by the year 2030. They understand the terrible effect of methane on our environment and are using their authority to reduce that damage. I urge you, as city council members of this wonderful town of Pacifica, to do the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have Diane Bailey, followed by Christine Bowles. Diane Bailey, you may go ahead with your comment.
Good evening, Mayor Beer and council members, and thank you so much for the opportunity to comment. My name is Diane Bailey. I'm with the Campaign for Fossil-Free Buildings in Silicon Valley. We're an alliance of 39 groups working together to accelerate a phase out of fossil fuels from our homes and buildings. And we already sent written comments earlier today, so I'll try to be brief. And several folks have voiced good comments so far that I really agree with, Bruce, Dash, Margot. To this evening's questions at hand, yes to all. As Margot stated, we really agree with staff's recommendations to proceed with a REACH code for new construction, following the model provided by the Bay Area REACH codes team, and ensuring that there's no lapse in the current REACH code, which will sunset at the end of this calendar year. The recommended approach has made really important improvements that will strengthen the code from 2019. And I know Pacifica was really a leader in 2019 and has a lot to be proud of. We also urge you to develop a comprehensive electrification ordinance for existing buildings as a priority in the coming year, if not sooner. It's critical to address existing buildings because, as the staff report notes, only 23 new residential units were approved for construction over the past 5 years. Hope I understood that correctly, but the city has issued hundreds of permits for residential remodels like water heater replacements. And this is a very important area to intervene and interrupt the cycle of gas use. It's crucial to address gas appliances in existing buildings because gas presents a major health and safety risk to residents. We know that appliances are leaking methane gas even when they're turned off. And we know that the air pollution produced by gas appliances is collectively even higher than pollution from vehicles throughout the Bay Area. And we know that methane gas is a climate superpollutant, and Pacifica is exceptionally vulnerable to climate change. And we're already feeling those impacts of climate change. Although staff recommend waiting until next year to address existing homes and buildings, I think that there are really rational and practical steps that Pacifica can take right now to address existing gas appliances. The cities of San Mateo and Palo Alto are adding several sensible measures that pertain to planned remodels, and I urge you to consider including all remodels in the REACH code this year. We know in our hearts and we know in our heads that much, much more needs to be done to respond to the climate crisis that we're in. And that means really accelerating our efforts to phase out fossil gas use in existing homes. As Dash noted, the federal climate bill, also known as the Inflation Reduction Act, offers much support, many rebates and financial incentives to replace gas with electric. I hope you'll move forward swiftly with staff's recommendations on the REACH code and also expedite your work for existing homes and buildings. Thank you very much. Let's do our part towards a climate safe future.
Thank you so much.
And the last hand I have raised is Christine Bowles. Christine.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you. I thank you, Council, for bringing this important topic to the public for discussion tonight. Again, my name is Christine Bowles. I'm an architect here in Pacifica, and our work specializes in green and sustainable building. I agree with the previous speakers. I just want to urge you to say yes to all four of the questions that are before you tonight. We are facing climate change here, as you all know, with sea level rise and erosion and landslides and flooding and fire risk. And we need to do all that we can to reduce our emissions immediately and obviously into the future. The work that goes into our construction can easily last 50 to 75 years. And so it's important to make these investments now that will help save the planet, but also help save money and the cost of energy for these buildings. I urge you to approve these new codes for new buildings before January 1st so that they can be incorporated with the new building codes as was suggested. I again want to offer tours for our own house. We built Pacifica's first all-electric net zero energy home. So if anyone's concerned or not sure what a heat pump water heater or heater looks like, we also have a condensing electric dryer, induction cooking, and a solar system that offsets all of our electric use and enough for car charging as well. And it was very cost effective. I have all that data I'm happy to share with the city and with residents as we look to updating these codes. I'd also like us to think about water use, and I didn't hear any of that from the consultant, and maybe you can speak to that. Just the process of purifying water and pumping it takes a lot of energy as well. And I haven't heard if the new building codes will be doing more to encourage gray water use, so we can reuse water from our showers, sinks, and laundry for our garden instead of using fresh water for those things. And again, our house is an example of that. I'm happy to share. Let's see. And I agree wholeheartedly that it's important for us to look at existing buildings. There are some easy things we can do for appliances, as was said, but also adding insulation, better windows, and so forth. Again, these are small investments when you're already doing a remodel that can really make a big difference in the long term. Hoping Pacifica can be a visionary leader in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next I have a hand raised by John Keener, followed by Robert Gold. John Keener, you may go ahead and unmute. Please state your name for the record.
Good evening, Council. John Keener here. Good to see all of you, even if you can't see me. I would, like most of the other speakers, urge you to move on to the next step, answer all 4 questions affirmatively, and move in an expeditious manner to approve reach codes for the for new construction by the end of the year, so that there's no interruption, and maybe consider reach codes for some reach codes for existing construction next year. So that's my comment. And once again, wonderful to see you all, and thank you for your service. Believe me, I know how much that means. Good night.
Good night, John. Thank you.
Next commenter I have is Robert Gold. Robert, you may go ahead and begin your comment. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Dr. Robert Gould, and I'm president of San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibility. And the first thing I wanted to say quickly is to give my apology, because I was on another meeting and came in very late here. But I wanted to provide the support of my organization, which represents hundreds of health professionals throughout the San Francisco Bay Area, in support of the strongest possible reach codes for dealing with our obvious climate emergency, and to move most aggressively on all fronts. And that includes extending the reach codes and the changes that we need for building electrification to existing buildings as well as new construction. I infer from the few comments I've been able to hear support for advancing in this way, and I'll just end very quickly, to provide the strongest support for the health reasons that we're all facing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gold. Mayor Beer, I don't see any more hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. We can close public comment and bring it back to council. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to quickly circle back to that question about water use and ask our experts if now is a pertinent time to factor water use into this conversation, or if it might be a little outside the scope of the REACH code conversation we're currently having. Thank you.
I can take that one on. We are not a water utility, so we focus mainly on the carbon emissions side of the equation. But I will let you know the Portola Valley is including gray water ready language in their proposed REACH code, which also includes some existing building measures, and will come to their city council, I believe, on October 12th. I can forward that language to staff if you direct staff to include gray water ready or something like that. I can forward that along.
Christian, I'd love to see what that looks like, and probably, if not possibly, include it.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'll make a note.
Thank you.
Okay. So Barros, I know you said you had lots of questions.
I have questions.
Okay.
Before all of this, has PG&E been contacted to determine whether or not they have the capacity to supply the electricity to everyone? Because I know that's a problem. We were talking about emergency centers, and our emergency center at the community center was used because no one had power. And so therefore all these electric houses would have no power. Also, people indicated that there were only 23 new housing units built in the last 5 years. I think it's more than that. Let's see. And the question on carbon emissions from houses, I looked at the EPA and they said all buildings together have a 16% carbon emission. A letter we got today said 35%, and someone tonight said 25. So, and I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago where they said housing itself is 6. So what is it? I know let's see.
I want to get some answers really quick for that.
Instead of keep it on.
No, then we'll come back because I think there were 3. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll start. I don't have an answer to the third question. Perhaps Blake or Myra can address that. With respect to PG&E, they are among the key stakeholders that staff will need to engage depending on the council's guidance. And so certainly the availability of electrical infrastructure and capacity is a very relevant consideration before adopting this, but it will require time and staff resources to engage. And so we haven't undertaken that without knowing the council's direction. With respect to the number of housing units per year, the staff report cites an average of 23 units per year constructed between 2015 and 2021, not a total of 23 units.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Christian, did you want me to chime in on the PG&E question as well?
Sure, if you're prepared to, absolutely.
So I do have a couple slides in the slide deck, and I believe everyone has access to those as well. Just a few talking points. Grid reliability is obviously an important concern. Some important things to know, just to put it into context, is that, really when we're talking about capacity, we're really talking about cooling loads in the summer, right? When our summer peaks. And that is primarily driven by temperature. So it's primarily driven by climate change. And we're going to continue to see those peaks as our climate continues to warm up, as those as those temperatures continue to rise and continue to be stronger. One thing that one article that I found, I think it was in the LA Times, we increased our utility scale battery storage capacity by 27 times this past year. And during this last heat wave, it really, it prevented some rolling blackouts. So battery storage and solar is going to be part of that grid reliability piece, and hopefully with the elimination of state gas subsidies, that can free up some funds for additional grid hardening efforts.
Thank you. Our summers are generally foggy, so
I gotta remember who I'm talking to.
Yeah,
you're right. That's where I like to escape to in the summer. I'm in Sacramento.
A lot of people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then does anybody have a response to carbon emissions from buildings?
Yes, a very good question. And I have done climate action planning for a lot of the cities in the county in my previous job. So I have a good idea on that. It is, there are a lot of assumptions made in a climate action plan that can change the numbers slightly. But I think what you might be seeing in the difference in those numbers is a difference in the boundary condition. So homes in the United States, where 25% of homes are all electric, is going to have a different emissions profile than a percentage than the homes in all of San Mateo County, which buildings represent 30% of carbon emissions in San Mateo County. And then in Pacifica, if you're looking specifically at Pacifica's boundary, I don't have Pacifica's numbers in front of me, but I do believe I can find those for you and send them to you. That's going to be a different number as well, depending on how much if you have land, if there's a landfill in a territory, which the county has, but I don't know the Pacifica would have a landfill. And then when you look at nationwide, you also have airplanes and a lot of things that aren't included in local government inventories. So that's the big difference in the numbers.
Thank you. Yeah, that information would be great to have. Susie, do you want to continue?
You know what? I'll let Tiger talk. Yes.
Okay. I'm going to come back to you, though. We'll roll around everyone else. I'll come back.
Well, actually, I kind of wanted to respond to one of Councilmember Vaterlaus's points. And I think that one of the code options available to us is for new buildings, making them at least ready to have power battery backup, if not actually require certain ones to have the batteries installed. But what occurred to me was when we were having the outages a couple years back or whenever it was, it seems like, if not prior to it, shortly thereafter, a lot of people were investing in gas generators so that should it happen again, they're ready with their gas generator, which to my mind is kind of equivalent to battery backup in terms of the idea is to have a backup, right? So logistically, I don't know if the battery backup is going to be as reliable or not. It's a thing that I don't know because I'm not a professional, but it occurs to me that if what we're requiring of new construction is that we get people ready to have that battery backup so that instead of throwing that much more greenhouse gas into the atmosphere because of the gas generators they're buying, that's one of the REACH codes we adopt. That might actually satisfy at least part, if not all, of the concern you're raising on that point.
Thank you, Tiger. Councilmember Beckman.
I just wanted to explore and circle back to the issue about grid impacts. Even though Pacifica has cooler weather in the summer, I don't understand, I don't have enough personal knowledge about the grid and how it works in terms of possible outages that affect our residents due to high temperatures in other places. So while we personally may be having cool weather, we still also may be having cool weather and no power. And that's what I wanted to hear more about, if anyone has that information, or to add that to Christian's list. Thank you.
Something I wanted to add about the PG&E question in general is, since we're talking about new construction primarily tonight, we do have a support letter from PG&E that says they can handle the increased load of all electric new construction, which is only a portion of buildings, and then only a portion of the building we're talking about. When it comes to the cold weather impacts, a better grid is certainly going to be important as we move forward. Peninsula Clean Energy does not manage the grid, but we do work with PG&E. They are the transmission distribution authority there. Yes, so during these peak events, one thing that's nice about electrification, both on the vehicle and let's say hot water heater side, is that we're starting to build grid responsiveness into these items so that we can call on them to pause when there's a flex event like happened previously. I know that Peninsula Clean Energy also called around to cities to see if there are ways they could help reduce load at city buildings. But yes, I would say in your local distribution network, if the next town over starts using a lot of air conditioning, that does that does create bottlenecks in some parts of the system. And then what we were seeing in the flex event was actually included a statewide kind of bottleneck and constraint on generation. We do believe electrification, as we put in these technologies that can be responsive to the grid, that should be able to help with those issues going forward. And it's something we think about a lot, but we'll continue to as well.
You've all lost. I'll come back to you.
And I actually, I'm going to state my opinion now. I don't have a problem with the new construction. I 100% do not want to get into existing because I've, like I said, I've gone to a lot of meetings about it. I listened to the entire 8 hours of Half Moon Bay talking about it. It was an interesting meeting. But it's kind of funny to me too, that when they have the grid outages, they say, oh, don't charge your electric car. That means people are stuck. It's, it just doesn't even seem like it should happen. And if PG&E runs out of clean energy, where does the energy come from? They're still providing energy. Where does it come from? That's probably good for right now.
So I think those are questions that a lot of our community members have as well. So I don't know if there's any responses, especially to the EV charging stations, and if there's backup batteries for those and how that could work.
I would say that in an emergence, we don't have a line on the sand of this, and I'm the buildings person. I would agree with you that on the electric vehicle side, in a case of an emergency, I would tend to want to keep my tank full. And there is there's an important ability to escape there in the event of an emergency. I agree with that. One thing I didn't note on the power outage side, I do want to share this. A gas furnace doesn't work during a power outage because it has an electric fan. Depending on the furnace, like a gas fireplace would work. But most central furnaces with fans do not. Instantaneous gas water heaters often have electric sensors, so they often will not work in a power outage. So just since these are the appliances we're thinking of, just want you to be aware.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
I recall my water heater gives me hot water during a power outage. These are important questions that we're going to have to grapple with as our overarching infrastructure becomes modernized. No doubt not by tomorrow. That doesn't mean we shouldn't take whatever as large a step as we can in that direction. Appreciating that we have to account for the realities as we have them. I wanted to especially thank Margot Maimon for reaching out to me and helping with my understanding. I've been kind of buddying with Sue Beckmeyer on this topic, and I know that she might have similar feedback. I favor, when it comes to existing building codes, I agree. Now is probably not the ideal time to have the conversation. I am interested in having the conversation. I love the staff's notion that during goal setting is the time that we put it on the work plan, because I think that it will take substantial staff resources to suss out the large number of options we'll have, so that we can have a conversation that doesn't devolve into a lot of concern from our community, but will give us so many options that we'll be able to choose those that are easier and find maybe something that looks like a middle ground. And so I favor putting that, having staff bring that back up during goal setting when it comes to existing. I'd love to bite it off now. I just don't think we have quite the resource. And Christian, correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I would certainly agree that it is a focused, intensive effort. And so that's why staff's recommendation is to consider it as part of the goal setting process among all of the various priorities for city resources and staff time. Mayor Beer, if it's acceptable to you, it sounds like the questions have somewhat tapered off in the deliberations and council direction is somewhat beginning. I'd like to put the 4 questions on the screen to hopefully guide us through in a structured manner to ensure that staff gets input on all of the questions that we have.
Sure, that would be great. I know Sue Beckmeyer does have her hand up, so if you can go ahead, Sue, while he's doing that, that'd be great.
Yeah, just to follow on, I agree, Tiger. Yes, Margot, thank you, Margot. And thank you in advance, because I'm sure the conversations will be ongoing. And I would favor working on some kind of educational, informational process, outreach, articles. I'm not sure what the right, there's going to be a mix, but I think we need to have the community understand what the issues are well in advance of council deliberation and discussion on adopting codes regarding existing. I think that may be, in hindsight, from the point of view of decision makers in Half Moon Bay, something they would have benefited from. And I would like to learn from that experience.
If I might just very briefly, I know that San Mateo also recently passed some existing construction reach codes. Between now and whenever we have our discussion, I'd love to see where they are in, and it might not be that they get very far in implementation, but I'd love to track where they're at, what the community response was, and if their model might not be appropriate for what we wind up looking at.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I would also like to thank Margot for meeting with me and helping me understand and showing us the examples of what we can be looking at tonight. So I really appreciate that a whole lot. And so let's just begin with question number 1.
Thank you, Mayor. Should staff prepare the existing REACH codes for readoption where they have not been superseded by 2022 California Building Code requirements?
Yes.
I think so, yes.
Okay, we have consensus there.
That was the easy one. That was the starter question. So let's move on. Oh,
quick question for clarification, and I am along with everybody else, but that doesn't preclude then going after models and adding on, correct?
If I'm understanding the question, I think that make it into questions 2 and 3, going beyond what the prior REACH codes were.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So question 2, should staff modify any of the 2019 REACH codes? I think most likely that focuses on questions related to the exceptions. We can go back to the exception slides if that would be a good time to do that now. A lot of discussion came up from our colleagues at PCE and TRC about their opinions on the appropriateness of exceptions and the impact of those exceptions. I think their opinions, I don't want to speak for them, but were that in many cases the exceptions probably aren't necessary and maybe don't advance the overall desire to electrify buildings.
Can you refresh my memory if our codes adopted in 19 required electric ready? For example, under the exception, residential buildings may include non-electric cooking appliances and fireplaces. Did that mean, but you have to have electric ready? At that time, did we have that included?
That's correct. The exception to that pre-wiring, as we'll call it, was for the restaurants. So the other types of uses are required to pre-wire. For example, a single family residence, new construction, all electric building requirement. If they follow the exception for cooking appliances or fireplace, they also need to pre-wire the space where those gas powered appliances are installed.
Okay. And then another follow-on question, if I might, Mayor Beer.
Yeah, please.
Is it possible and not arduous to determine, with these exceptions in place back in 19, how many of the new buildings that were constructed opted for these options? Is it a hard thing to determine that?
No, because our staff already did that work. I don't have specific numbers, but I have qualitative descriptions, and that's what I asked for. So basically, since enactment of the 2019 REACH codes, they're not in any particular order, but I'll try to systematize it a little bit. Multifamily residential, let's start with that. There was one main project of 24 units, and it has both gas and electric. So it did utilize the exceptions allowable for cooking and fireplaces. Let's go to mixed use first. Mixed use was all electric. Multifamily residential ADUs, there were 42 of those at the villages at Pacifica that were permitted. Those are all electric. And then ADUs, there's 3 categories. There's detached, attached, and then conversion of existing space. For detached ADUs, most are all electric. For attached ADUs, which is basically an addition to an existing home, most use the exception to allow gas. And then for conversion of existing space, most use the exception to allow gas. And then for new single family residences, most use the exception.
Thank you.
And there's one category, forgive me, commercial, just plain commercial, all electric in the examples that were cited. And then the other commercial example, as mentioned, was mixed use, also electric without exceptions.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm sorry, question. Did you just cite the example of commercial uses?
I did. And so there wasn't a lot, but the examples that our staff found was that they were electric.
Oh, okay. And were the commercial uses restaurants or no?
I don't have that information, Mayor Pro Tem.
And I ask because I'm personally okay with getting rid of the exception for the residential buildings may include non-electric cooking appliances and fireplaces, and I'm okay getting rid of the exemption for the ADUs. My question still stands about oh, am I looking at a different thing than I thought I was looking at? No, it just was a different order than I thought. So I'm still questioning about the public agency owned and operated emergency centers. I feel like that's a conversation more than I'm not sure how I feel about it right now for the reasons I stated earlier. And then
Mayor Pro Tem, if you'd allow, I'll just share a couple observations on that topic so you can mull it over and figure out if there's more questions. So I think one approach to that is to say, yes, we want our emergency operations centers to be able to operate in a variety of conditions, have gas, make sure that if the power goes out, service is provided. As we're thinking about that in the context of new building construction, keep in mind that over the long term, many people are forecasting that the gas network will be shut off, and that may actually have a counterproductive outcome for the resiliency of those facilities. And so if you think about the long term for any emergency center Pacifica will construct, it's likely to be there for 50, 75, 100 years, right? Given our track record of finances and ability to replace facilities. So you may want to think, are there alternative resiliency options such as generators, whether diesel or battery backup systems that might actually somewhat counterintuitively provide greater resilience than a gas fallback.
Thank you. That made that decision a lot easier for me. And then the other one I'm still mulling over is the idea of commercial kitchen appliances. When I last spoke with my advocate, at least to the best of my ability, and I mean my advocate for stronger REACH codes, the nomenclature I can recall best to draw from was commercial kitchens may be approved for combustion equipment. And so that leaves this question in my mind. Might that not be a bad thing? But on the other hand, I'm just kind of wondering how businesses are dealing with it. Do we know how businesses are dealing with it? Do we know if recent businesses have been putting electric kitchens in instead? Commercial businesses. Apparently I'm getting tired. But that's another question mark. Do we have data about whether or not recently restaurants are putting electric kitchens in?
Yeah, so I think that's something I'll need to drill down on further. Trying to get information for this study session across all of the building categories. Commercial was lumped into a single category. Before the council were to move forward with adoption of any of these, I can get that breakout since the 2019 REACH code adoption to say, okay, what types of commercial uses were they, and were they all electric? My guess is, based on the data I have, that they have been all electric, given the summation for commercial and mixed use was electric without triggering exceptions. But we will want to, I think, be certain of that to give you that comfort.
Okay, so intuitively, I'm inclined in that direction, but I'd love to have that data. And that sounds like I also have time to circle back to my advocate and ensure my understanding is correct before I have a strong feeling one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I did have one more. I'm sorry. Is there any discussion in any of this about no existing electrified buildings being converted to a mixed fuel building?
So that's a level of specificity we didn't tee up for the council tonight, but it's certainly a relevant consideration. And so if there is a council direction on that, that sort of falls within, I think, some of the more general provisions rather than specific requirements. So we can study that further and make a recommendation if the council wants to move forward.
That's certainly my predilection, and I leave it to council to decide.
And that would fall under the third question, correct?
Sort of questions 2 and 3, I feel like sort of blend together a little bit. If we want, I can bring the question slide back up if we don't need to focus on the exceptions.
I think it's important for me to see this slide right now before you do that, because I'm going to go ahead and say how I'm feeling about all of these. So I am personally very comfortable with getting rid of all the exceptions except for the operation centers, the operated emergency centers. I just wanted to state that right out. I'm very comfortable with removing all the exceptions. Sue, go ahead.
I would need to talk to some restaurants first about the actual cooking without gas, because I think that's huge. The flat tops, the stoves. I mean, I think most restaurants have gas. Mm-hmm. So I would, before we went into that one, I'd like to talk to some restaurant owners regarding that. I know they have new induction cooking, which is electric and is supposed to be great. Also, but I keep thinking about the cost, but if they're building new, then, the cost factors aren't as high. Trying to switch over after you have something is very high.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that's why I was comfortable with the new construction exemptions. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I appreciate that. And if there's any other information that we can get, from our experts about the electric, combustion cooking or whatever, inductive, what is it called?
Induction.
Thank you. Yeah, if we can get to learn about that, that would be super helpful.
I was just gonna respond to the question about all electric restaurants. Kind of the poster child right now is the French Laundry and in Napa. And every cuisine type is different, right? So as of right now, that is an anecdotal example. There's different types of cooking needs. And we're constantly looking for other examples to add to our list.
Okay, I'm okay to eliminate the exception for the ADUs and residential buildings, non-electric cooking appliances and fireplaces. I think the public agency owned and operated emergency centers, I'm just more comfortable that they have gas access to control, to use for a generator. But when we replace the buildings, I'm perfectly okay with a battery or something like that. Because I would imagine, the battery technology is going to get better and better. And I think at some point when we ever get around to replacing the battery, the buildings, the batteries will be pretty there, because you also have to remember, I do believe schools are considered emergency centers, because when we remodel the schools, they have to go through the Department of State architecture because they aren't considered evacuation centers. So if we put a mandate in there to the school districts, you have to have battery power or whatever, I think that's an unfunded mandate on our part to the school districts. And since both of them are funded lowest in the county or second lowest in the county, I don't think that's fair for us to do.
That was the nature of my question earlier, Mike, my comment earlier. It was along those same lines. Yeah.
Yeah. I just think, I think they have gas now, or boilers, whatever. So I would just think leave the owned and operated emergency centers, schools, community center, and police department as is. And then if we, find battery technology gets real cheap, or solar power can be put on them or something like that, then I'm for it. I just want to be sure we can run a generator for our citizens in an emergency.
So, Councilmember O'Neill, thinking about the structure of the questions and focusing first on new buildings, if I understood your feedback correctly, you are open to eliminating the exception for new emergency operations centers that are constructed to require them not to have gas and to have some other form of backup, such as a diesel generator or battery backup. Is that correct?
Yes, because I do agree with you. At some point, they're probably going to shut off the gas valve. So we might as well build a new building to the new new reality.
Great. And perhaps either Mr. Ryder or Assistant City Attorney Bizzano can confirm my statement. But to the extent of alterations to existing school buildings, those would not be subject to City of Pacifica building permit review. And as a result, I think the base 2022 California Building Code would apply to those facilities. If a non-school use was proposed, it may be subject to the city's permitting authority, but that would be a new building. And so, would be subject to the new building requirements approved by the council.
Okay. And I have to admit, I'm kind of mixed on the restaurants. You know what I mean? Because I know even San Francisco put an exemption in for gas for their restaurants in their reach codes.
Before I go to Sue and then Sue, I want to go back and say that I am okay with all the exemptions listed for new construction. So I'll take back what I said before about the public agency owned after hearing Councilmember O'Neill. Councilmember Beckmeyer.
I wanted to make sure we're considering the private schools, which in our cases are what? The two parochial schools.
Pacific Bay and Good Shepherd.
And then we also have the Montessori. And then also the faith-based community buildings. Again, typical Pacifica. Those are old, and probably lots of communities. Those are older construction. And I realize we're talking new here, but are those even potentially included into that category of shelter or whatever the emergency shelters category?
This says public agency owned. Those are all private.
Okay. So I just wonder how they function. That's what I'm saying is I don't want to put them in a bind because they're not public agencies.
So they would be subject to City of Pacifica building code requirements.
Okay.
The question then becomes, do you carve out an exception for new buildings for those types of uses? or do we, conduct this detailed discussion as part of an existing buildings reach code discussion?
Right.
I think those are the two paths to consider for those types of uses.
Right. So I think they go into the same category then, right? I mean, new construction is new construction and would have certain requirements, but existing is a different animal.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
But you are getting a lot of information for our future conversations, aren't you, Christian?
And I think the council's reflecting the fact that it's a very complicated discussion. There are many what ifs and hypotheticals to consider and trade-offs to be made, certainly.
Councilmember Vardalos.
And that's what I'm going to talk about. If you're building a new ADU and you have enough electricity in your main to handle the ADU with gas heat, but then when you have to put in a heat pump and all electric, are you going to have to redo your whole panel and do all of your electricity again? Does that mean you may not build an ADU because of that? Whereas we would have had the buildings before, we may not if they're required to be all electric. Just another thought and consideration.
So, Councilmember Vardalos, I think your point's well taken about, if the gas service has capacity, it may be a cost-effective option to extend it, particularly for an addition or a conversion of existing space. What I'll offer, and others can supplement, is that you are already, however, going to have an electrician there to run a number of new circuits for all the domestic electric needs of the new ADU. And so when you think about that, it's probably not a great incremental cost to also run the circuits necessary for electrification of heat pump, for heating, or for water heating, or other electrification uses, when you look at it through that lens.
Sorry, except that if you have to get in a totally new electrical service, which I did at my house, very expensive. And I've been hearing lately that people won't put in new electrical services with knob and tube. Most of our houses have knob and tube wiring. And I guess, I don't know, I just heard this a couple of times that they don't want to upgrade the electrical service with knob and tube because they don't think that's safe. So then you have another huge issue.
I'm not aware of those issues, Councilmember Vardalos, about the knob and tube wiring. That's something that we can look into before bringing back the codes for further consideration. I think it is possible, and perhaps in many cases it will happen already, that a panel upgrade will be required to account for an ADU, given the number of dedicated circuits that would be required within that unit. So again, I think you in most cases will end up in the same place. Do you add an extra circuit and run, the cable for the heating and water heating, or do you do that through gas if capacity exists? That's, I think, the crux of the question in my mind.
Well, and we can always say where deemed, or except where deemed infeasible, right? We can add that.
Right. The infeasibility is going to be an umbrella consideration, in all scenarios, because there are instances where an unforeseen technical issue will prevent accomplishing the electrification. PG&E may not be able to provide the service when we get to a very site-specific level. And so certainly infeasibility will be there, in the background in all of these scenarios.
Does that include hardship?
So hardship, I think, would be a different conversation. If you're talking about financial hardship or time delay hardship, those are different factors than infeasibility. Infeasibility is a pretty absolute circumstance. I think hardship is something else that the council would need to consider.
Did you bring information back about that?
What type of hardship? Because there are various types of delays that can occur during construction, and it's hard to know if that's actually a hardship or just commonplace for construction. Financial infeasibility or
financial
hardship.
Yeah.
So you're thinking about income? Are you talking about a means-based hardship, Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking along the lines of instances where people have inherited assets and may not have current current assets themselves, but they're sort of like that house rich notion of you have this property, but the fiscal ability in terms of income and means is creating a hardship. It's a pretty narrow band of people, I would assume, but I don't know for sure.
I think in existing construction, hardship is a huge deal. Not so much in new construction in my mind.
That's true.
Yeah. Right. Correct. You're right. And that's what I'm thinking of. Sorry.
Yeah, that's true.
I appreciate everyone continuously reminding me.
Everybody's popping up right now, so.
Right.
I was going to just ask that same question because it seems like with new construction, someone who's building a new ADU or building a new facility is not going to fall into the hardship category financially.
Probably not. You're right. One other thing I wanted to add, though, in terms of the conversation that, or the points that Sue Vaterlos was making about knob and tube and all that, is I'm going to guess that there's certain areas of town, too, where we're going to see, based on the historical nature of when houses were built, what the style of power infrastructure would have been in those homes. Where in my neighborhood, for example, we know approximately when they were all permitted and in the way in which, the construction was being done at that time. But in areas like in Valamar and in Sharp Park, I think we're probably going to see a wider variety. So that may be where that exception issue would come into play more frequently.
Okay, do you have enough for number 2 and perhaps number 3, or should we just touch on number 3?
Yeah, I think so. Let me get back to the questions, and we'll make sure that we've covered all the categories. And I think I've also received a lot of feedback on question 4, but we could maybe see if there are other dimensions to that the council wants to discuss.
I would like to look at the gray water issue, whether that's, but I think we should consider putting that not on the reach codes, but something to study, because I don't know if staff could come up with all the options there might be if this has to be adopted by January 2023.
Possibly not all of the options, Councilmember O'Neill. Luckily, Blake has identified, I think, a starting point for us to look at with Portola Valley, and we can see if that might provide a relevant range of options for the council without significant time delay.
Okay, I'm open to having that as part of the reach codes, providing, we see those and they look doable for us. And I'm more than willing to put the water into the reach codes. But I do think at a minimum, we should have, I think the pipe is purple if it's recycled water. I think we should have the 2 pipes, so that at some point, if we ever build the infrastructure to have gray water or recycled water to go through. Do you follow what I mean? You know how we have the water treatment plants, water in Sharp Park Golf Course, and there's a separate pipeline for that. Okay. If we ever get to that point, then maybe it'd be nice to allow new construction to tap into that.
Yes, understood, Councilmember O'Neill. That's a separate set of issues, particularly with respect to permitting considerations through the Regional Water Board with respect to access to recycled water. And so that's its own basket of considerations, and frankly, not likely to affect a lot of properties in the near future, given the limited infrastructure for that. But gray water options are available, as you know, for potentially every home, depending on the circumstances. So we could consider that. So as I look at the questions, I feel like we got a lot of feedback on number 2 with respect to the exceptions in the 2019 REACH codes. There are other options for new construction. For instance, the electric vehicle parking and charger requirements that we probably do need to spend a moment on to see where the council may want to go with those. It may be best, Myra, if you want to bring up the slides and discuss those options to guide the council through them. So I'll give you a minute to prepare for that. I'll go back to my summation of some of the additional 2022 REACH code options for the council at a high level. So,
okay. Thank you.
Well, I think it does get into the EV parking requirements.
And Christian, can you remind me, is this to get direction on item 2 still, or have we moved on to?
This is for question number 3. So additional REACH code options for new buildings for the 2022 code update.
I think the hire was ready, or the hire was capable, correct?
The hire is ready.
The hire is ready? Okay. Then it should be ready. I think.
I was just going to say I favor the model codes that were presented, and I just wanted to start there. Thank you.
I do too.
Okay. This is a single family. So stay here.
Are there exceptions? Because I'm okay. I know we're talking new again, but my house doesn't have a 2-car space, so I couldn't put 2.
Yeah,
I have only a 1-car space.
Yeah, if it's just a 1-car space, what we recommend is just a level 2 EV circuit.
1, because this says 2.
Would this harken back to that where feasible nomenclature that is strewn throughout?
I think it's important to think of this through the new construction lens at this point in time. In many cases, if not all cases, new single-family residences will have a 2-car garage under the city's zoning regulations. So the space ought to be available. In the multifamily context, that's where you may get into situations where a 1-car garage is allowed, or perhaps in some cases, no garage at all. And so that may, sort of be a fork in the road of the discussion when we get to the multifamily context.
The last new construction house, I believe, that we approved on Santa Rosa, Salata, has no parking garage at all. So would they have to still put in the 2 EV chargers in that new construction?
So I don't know the complete answer to that. I think my inclination, and I would value the input from Myra and Blake, is that the garage doesn't appear to be the requirement. It seems to be the number of spaces.
Blake, go ahead.
Yes, I can answer that for you. Very good, very astute question. I do not have a garage. So the garage is not the requirement. So let's take a single family home, ignore the townhouse special case with the detached garage. But for a single family home with an attached garage, with 1 car and no other parking space, we actually do have it written in here. If a second parking space is provided, it shall be provided with a level 1 EV ready space. So I'll just read the first sentence. 1 parking space provided shall be a level 2 EV ready space. If a second parking space is provided, it shall be provided with a level 1 EV ready space. So surface parking, that's a driveway, would get a charging state, would get an EV ready outlet. And if there were 2, there would also be a level 1 EV ready outlet for the second car, whether in or outside of a garage. Good question.
And I would like to bring up another question is, how many people actually use their garage with the EV charger? You know what I mean? And most garages are used for storage. Is it possible to, that it has to be in the driveway? Because we usually require a driveway or whatever. Can an extension cord be used for car charger?
So I think, the functionality of the outlet in question, will be left to the designer for the unit. And so In many cases, I've seen EV chargers installed on the exterior of residences, so the cord can reach into the driveway and possibly into the garage if it's used for parking.
Okay.
Yeah, I would put, if I had a garage, I would put the outlet right near the garage door. In that case, that would be the smart place to put it.
Okay.
I think that's where I'm seeing a lot of it in my neighborhood. Although I did see one, I think, right on the street. Okay, anybody else have comments about that? Beckmeyer, you okay?
So is the council consensus to support the model code recommendation?
Yes, I think, yeah.
I heard a majority. I counted 3.
4 or 5. 3, 4, 5.
Great. So then I think multifamily residential is probably, the next discussion, and I think it gets more complicated. Certainly the 2022 code requirements, the baseline that will be in place has several different requirements. And then Myra can elaborate what the recommendation from the Bay Area Reach Code team would be for that.
Yeah, I'll do that now. Can you guys still hear me? My headset is going to die here soon, and I'm trying to figure out how to switch over to my computer audio. So I will take all the time I can get. So I have the multifamily slide here. And what we and Christian, let me know if you want me to dive into the details of the different low power and high power option at this time, or just in general what we at the Reach Codes team recommend, and then we can dive into the nuances of the code before you come back to council with the actual ordinance.
Yeah, I think my suggestion is to maybe take it in chunks. So, is there an appetite to go beyond, the method of the 2022 code, which is % of parking spaces? Do we want to think of it in a different way based on dwelling units with parking spaces? I think the idea is to provide a more direct correlation with occupants of units to charging stations, rather than just generally, % of parking spaces, which may not correlate to the dwelling units themselves and the ability of a particular unit occupant to have access to a charger. Is that a fair assessment of the intent of that, Myra?
Yeah. Our push for this year is to really we're really advocating for 100% access on the multifamily side for EV charging. So yeah, you'll notice that the whole pie chart is full. And it could be, within that pie chart, it could be a mix of EV charging stations and level 2 or level 1 EV ready spaces as well.
Are there exceptions and things for low income housing developments or incentives?
Yes, there are incentives. So I have on the next slide, it's here in the bottom right corner. Affordable housing, new construction is eligible for PCE incentives. Blake, do you have those dollar figures with you by any chance?
I'll look them up right now. Hold on. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Blake. As Blake looks that up, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so I can switch over to my computer audio before my headset dies.
So council, while we're in this transition point, it would help to think about, do you support 100% access for multifamily? Is that important for supporting the deployment and regular use of electric vehicles and supporting, the climate change goals of getting away from internal combustion engine vehicles towards EVs? If you support wider accessibility, perhaps it's not 100%, but perhaps it's more than the baseline of what the 2022 code is. And so is there a different point of calibration? Is it 60? Is it 80%? Is it 90%? We know that, even in 30 years, not everyone's going to own an electric vehicle. And so it may not be necessary for every space to have access, even though that's a laudable goal. So I think those are factors the council can consider when figuring out where to draw the line on this, recognizing this is for the next 3 years, and then there's another opportunity and another opportunity to ratchet it up. But recognizing that once a building is constructed, it's going to be there for decades to come, and it's much more expensive after the fact to retrofit and install the utilities.
This might be an instance where you have it, what is it, ready or capable, where they need to have someone come in and do the rest. I'm sorry, I'm confused on those two things, but because I think the market is going to drive whether or not everybody needs an EVC charger. And at some point, multifamily housing, it might be detrimental if you don't have your own charger. Like all the cars that park in the street in San Francisco, what are they going to do? So I think we should have 100% ready, and and then it's percentage capable. Capable means there's the plug and goes right in, right?
But
capable means the conduit's there, but you don't have the wiring and the circuit and the outlet. That's the good. The ready is where you actually run the wire, you have the circuit breaker in the box, and you have the plug at the end. That's the better. And then EV charging station is the best, where you actually have the charger installed.
Right. I would think you'd want 100% ready, or 100% capable, and a high percentage of ready.
So I'm just going to point out that come January 1st, the state is requiring at least 5% of multifamily parking spaces have charging stations. So there will be at least, you'll need to at least meet that minimum.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I see Blake has his hand up. Would you like to
I have the answer on the incentives if you would like that for EV charging.
That'd be great.
Sure. We have an incentive program called EV Ready to help cover EV charging in multifamily. It's specifically for multifamily. That applies to existing market rate multifamily. And then for affordable housing, it also applies for new. So both new and existing for affordable housing. That's like a custom incentive that's case by case on the building. The goal is to provide for existing buildings as much EV charging as you can without requiring a service upgrade from PG&E. And for affordable to cover the cost of the the extra cost that EV charging adds, because affordable housing often does not see a high uptake of EV electric vehicles yet, but we believe that they deserve access to electric vehicle charging as well.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
So I'll start by saying that again, I do favor the model code, but that being said, if we were to go with the model code, then would we be choosing between the low power option and the high power option? Question one.
What I was going to ask about.
I'm going to qualify this by saying yes, but we can also customize the options to what the needs are to Pacifica. And just as some added background, the difference between the two options here is we wanted to provide cities with some flexibility, because these options have costs associated with them, right? The high power option is a little bit more expensive. But there's also some people think that level 1 might be obsolete someday. So we also wanted to give jurisdictions the flexibility to prepare for solely level 2. So to answer your question, yes, but with modifications that are appropriate for Pacifica.
And so my second question is, let's say we went with the low power option. How simple or complex is it then to, in that future scenario that frankly you just alluded to, upgrade a level 1 EV ready to a level 2 EV ready? Is it simple? That's the question.
I don't know off the top of my head the details involved in the retrofits, but we would be talking about upgrading all those circuits. So I imagine there's quite a bit of work there. If it was we were at the EV capable space, it wouldn't be difficult, right? But at the EV ready level, I think there's quite a bit of retrofit dollars there. We could look into those. I don't have those off the top of my head.
I would say that it would be difficult to do that. There is a city, I don't know them off the top of my head, that allows either option for depending on what the developer would prefer. As far as level 1, some people really do not like level 1, which is why we've provided the level 2 option. And then many people charge on a level 1. I charged on a level 1 for 5 years at a beach town and got along just fine. So there's a lot of opinions there, and that's typically how this, from experience, is how a city will tend to select one versus the other.
I'm almost embarrassed to say I'm not yet an electric vehicle owner, but within that context, then when I read that it's charging at a 3 to 4 mile for every hour, internally I scoff a little bit. That seems, to my sensibility, way too low, and I'm somebody who likes to go on long trips occasionally, and so that makes me very nervous, since that's my sensibility. So I'm kind of erring toward the high power option on the model code. But that having been said, we had that conversation a little earlier about, well, those townhomes over there have 130 spots conceivably, and if we were going to do that, would we want truly every one of those 130 spots? Which to me is yes, as the person who doesn't have the money to develop that. And so my idea in that scenario is maybe we go with the model code high power option up to a certain number of units, after which we make them capable but not ready or some such. Anyway, my opinion for the moment anyway is that we go toward the high power option on the model code.
I was going to suggest at a minimum, and I guess I'm really wondering why this isn't this way. It feels like the difference between the low and the high is made, the variance between those is made even greater by the fact that with the low, 60% is at level 1 and 40% is at level 2. And I was wondering, what about flipping those? I mean, I know it's incremental, but I agree with you, Tiger. Level 1 is really low. And to have the majority of the low power option be the lowest category, and then when you compare that and look over to the high powered option, it just seems like the division between those two is so great.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
I was just going to further emphasize that we can tailor the percentages, for the example that Councilmember Beckmeyer just gave, the 40% level 2 EV chargers, 60% level 1 EV ready. If you also notice, what we're recommending is, while it's a lower percentage at level 2, those are the ready to go installed EV charging stations, leaving the other 60%, for chargers to be installed in the future. Whereas in the high power option.
Okay, I got you.
So the difference between,
I was getting confused between capable and ready.
So one thing I didn't point out before, I think it's important to point out now, is that these two also have a different level of amenity, right? The low power option has a higher level of amenity, meaning 40%, what we're recommending is 40% on the low power option side to have EV chargers. And then on the high power option, it's all level 2, but where that package is a lower amenity because only 15% of the spaces have chargers.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, there's a lot of details and definitions, and so where we spend most of our time is on the EV charging recommendations.
Okay. So with that clarification, I want to withdraw what I just said and agree with Tiger that I am leaning toward the model code.
Councilmember Fadala.
In every 100% of spots, these reach codes will be reassessed in 3 more years. To me, 100% seems excessive. But I understand that it will be harder to put in the systems later. But it just seems kind of excessive to have 100% at this time when it's going to be a really long time before everyone has electric vehicles. A really long past when I'm alive.
Mayor Beer, can I ask a clarification of Myra and Blake? Can you just explain again how the application of the percent of dwelling units works? So I think it's easy to understand the percent of parking spaces, percent of dwelling units with parking spaces. Does this mean each dwelling unit only needs to have one EV component? If it has more than one space for that dwelling unit, that second or third or extra space does not have to have anything. Is that the correct application of the percent of dwelling units with parking spaces?
Correct. In a 20 unit apartment where there's 40 spaces, so 2 dedicated spaces for each unit, and then say 10 guest spots. So now we're talking 50 spaces, but only 20 units. There would only be 20 required. So each dwelling unit has access to one way to charge and that's because 100% of parking spaces, if there were 2 parking spaces per unit, would be very expensive.
Right. So the idea is to ensure coverage for all dwelling units, but not necessarily all parking spaces.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
I think it's an important but a confusing distinction. And so whereas percent of parking spaces won't necessarily ensure that every dwelling unit has access to electric vehicle charging options.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Sue, did that just convince you over to the other side, or are you still wrestling with it?
Vaderlos, you're asking.
Yes, Vaderlos.
Well, yeah, that made a huge difference because I'm looking at a thing with 100 units and 100 charging stations. It's like, whoa, I think that's excessive. So, but now I get it.
It seems to me like a reasonable balance where each household, right, in a dwelling unit can manage its access to a single piece of charging infrastructure, whether the charger's installed or they have to add their own charger to a plug that's already installed, rather than sort of dictating for them, how much of the site is going to have access rather than a household basis.
Okay, so I would go for the high power option.
Me too.
That was an important distinction. Thank you for helping us navigate that, Christian.
We're good for that one.
So Mayor Beer, I may not have captured your preference on, I think there was focus and clear desire for you to understand and try to make accommodation for financial incentives for affordable housing. But could you please clarify where you're at if you have an opinion on this issue?
Yes, I mean, I do desire to have exceptions for low-income housing. I guess I just need more information about that. So perhaps you can bring that back, but I do favor the high power option.
Thank you. So Myra, is now a good time to go to the non-residential, i.e. the commercial?
Okay. So just to refresh everyone's memory, the way that we have this structured, and again, we can customize this, every city has different, their their commercial building stock looks different. Some are heavy on the retail, some are heavy on the office space. But what we currently have is for offices requiring 20% level 2 EV charging stations with 30% of the parking spaces. And now we're going back to the parking space definition, right? Because we're no longer dealing with individual residential dwelling units. 30% of the parking spaces be level 2 EV capable for offices, and then other non-res 10% level 2 EV charging stations and 10% level 2 EV capable.
And Myra, is some of the thought behind this that offices have a different sort of dwelling time for those parking at the building or the use, whereas if we consider all other very likely in Pacifica to be retail, you have a lot of people coming and going and a lot of turnover. So multiple people can more readily utilize less or fewer charging spaces. Is that the logic?
Yeah, that's right. I am also guilty of admitting I don't have an EV yet, but from what I hear quite a bit is that for people that go into their offices and who have EVs, they use their EV chargers at the office as well, and those spaces tend to fill up pretty quickly, whereas retail is not as high utilization.
And Myra or Blake, I just want to be clear for the council. Is there anything in either the residential or non-residential EV charging model code requirements that addresses how the electricity is paid for during the charging? Is there anything that would prevent a property owner, for example, from charging, commercial visitors from having to pay for the charging, for instance, for non-residential?
Yeah, we don't get into any business models. We leave that up to the discretion of the developer and whoever the future property owner will be.
Right. So in both instances, a property owner could provide the amenity and decide to pay, for residential or non-residential charging, or allow the stations to charge, individual users of those for the charging costs.
Yeah.
And I do know we talk about it a lot in Economic Development Committee, right? About that it can actually increase our economic development if we have more charging stations, more people will want to stop and shop. Councilmember Vadalos.
I was thinking about, say you redid all of Rockaway and the city owns the parking lot there. So if the city put in chargers in that parking lot, which is a good idea, then it would seem that the city would charge people to use them. And that's a mix of offices and commercial in the center. So you would have to just decide which of those you wanted to do, because it is a mixed. So, but I would think that the city would charge. Makes sense to me.
Well, I think that's a policy question. The city could charge, to recover costs, or it could make them free or low cost, to incentivize the use, or as an economic development strategy. I think, that decision would have to be made, I think, probably on a facility by facility basis by the city manager.
Yeah, I would say that I think for most public parking lot services, those are, there's a third party provider and there's a business arrangement between whoever's paying that utility bill and the third party provider where the public costs are covered for providing that electricity. So I drive an EV, I pull into the back of Lindemar Shopping Center over here, charge up, I've got the account that I'm paying for that charging. So there's not a cost to the landlord, and in a public parking lot, that would be the city.
Councilmember O'Neill.
Would we want to have maybe a higher percentage for specific things like a hotel? You figure the person's going to be, they might be driving, this is a one-night stay, and they want to drive 200 miles tomorrow. They would need the full time for framing. So would we want a higher percentage, or can we set a higher percentage of EV charging for hotels?
I think that's an interesting concept, Councilmember O'Neill. It's something we can consider and see if other communities have addressed it in that fashion. I don't have any firsthand expertise right now in that particular issue.
Mayor Pro Tem. Oh, sorry. City manager's here first.
I had a question that maybe Myra or Blake might be able to answer, but it's maybe a kind of a technical and construction one. So we're talking about new construction, and in the multifamily models, the model doesn't include anything about EV capable. It's either ready or charging station. It would seem to me in constructing a new building that there is a very small marginal cost between EV ready and EV capable. If you're going in and you're putting in charging stations, that making other spots EV ready is a very small marginal cost. Do you have any data about that? It would just, because EV capable, they're already running stuff for the EV charging stations. And in other words, another way I'm asking this question is, for the model code, why is there not any percentage of EV ready?
That's a really good question. The cost, I do not have the numbers directly in front of me. It's highly dependent on the length of the wire run. The extra cost between EV capable and EV ready is basically the wire. You could argue the outlet as well, but on an EV capable space, you have to put a cap on there, which costs about the same as an outlet. So it's really the length of that wire, which is, they've gotten expensive because of COVID, like most things, or inflation. You could make that ready. The reason we left it as capable is it's hard to predict the type of retail or office and how much it'll be used. Different retails see the EV charging stations always filled and some may never be used. So that is why we left capable there. But the city could certainly strike capable and make that into ready. That's a really good point.
Thank you, City Manager. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I certainly favor the model code. I thought that was a great question from our city manager about making it ready rather than capable. And it sparked a follow-up question. If the developer is putting in the capable or the ready, whichever it may be, or let's say the developer puts in the capable, Christian, might it be incumbent on whomever then is pulling a permit for the business itself? Can we add a condition of approval whereby they have to make it ready in order to, or even install the charging station itself for them to get their permit approved for their business?
I think it's a possibility worth considering. I think one factor to keep in mind is that the language in a particular lease might limit a business occupant from making improvements beyond the lease space. And so that could be a complication that presents a practical problem for a particular tenant, given, hey, the landlord wants me to open my, restaurant here, but not go, meddling in the parking lot beyond. And so you'd have to prepare for the potential that they may run into feasibility issues. Is that a qualifying exception? There's some complexity there in my mind.
And City Attorney, did you want to add to that?
Well, my recommendation would be that these requirements stay within the building code, because these are the standards that are paced against projects. And so we want all of those standards to be kept within the building code rather than imposed as a condition of approval, which could get challenged.
Fine. So in that case, I certainly am charmed by the idea of raising the capable to ready status on those model codes if there's council buy-in. Either way, I'm favoring the model codes.
I'm also favoring the model codes, and I totally have buy-in for that. I think the more ready we can get our city, the better. So I'm I like the idea of moving it from capable to ready.
I'm okay with that.
Ross, did you want to say something?
I'm fine with that too.
Okay. Christian, did you get enough there?
I did, and just to put another spin on the question that Mayor Pro Tem asked, this is new construction, and so the assumptions will need to be made on the use at the time of construction, and that burden is on the property owner developing. The other question, I would say falls within the existing building category, and so there's another chance to think more about it. And is there a way to, heighten the requirement, or, if we go with what the council majority seems to want, requiring upgrade from ready to charger then under certain circumstances. And so we can think about what opportunities may exist in the existing building options, if depending on the answer to number 4, which we're going to move on to momentarily.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I just wanted to say, since we brought up the existing construction codes, that we are, it sounds like, very likely going to be having a discussion about it, goal setting. Please just factor into the ongoing list that you're writing down the notion that tabletop discussions, if and when it's time to start planning that out. I'm just listening to the conversation we're having, and I imagine the community feedback will be robust, and that might be a nice way to start whittling down some of that robust community feedback when the time comes. Thank you.
Good idea. All right. That mean we're ready to move on to number 4?
Yes. So really, I think the question of the night largely is, is there interest on the part of the city council to formalize for consideration during the fiscal year 2023-2024 council goal setting and work plan development process, an item that would involve evaluation of existing building reach code options for the city council to consider, separate and apart in staff's recommendation anyways from the ongoing effort to update the 2022 California Building Code that we're obligated to do, and the various new building reach codes that we spent a lot of time talking about tonight. The council does have the option, although it would be very challenging to package that as part of the current process, but there are some practical as well as perhaps some political considerations with respect to that combination.
My answer is yes.
My answer is no.
Can I ask a clarifying question on option 4? I don't have the language in front of me for that, for question 4, sorry. So just to understand, the idea is, okay, we're pushing off consideration of making any reach codes changes for existing construction for council to bring up the idea of addressing that during goal setting, right? And so just the understanding that there's no work that's going to be done on analyzing existing construction, variables. Council can talk about anything they want to talk about in goal setting and then decide and adopt a goal for the following fiscal year to start analyzing whether there should be reach codes for existing construction. I just want to make clear the sort of sequence or timing of that.
That is my understanding.
Okay.
Others?
Can I? So it sounds, as I read item 4, the way it's worded here, there really isn't a specific statement about the scope, but it says development process to study potential adoption of reach codes that are applicable to existing buildings, right? So it's not saying what the the scope of that might be. It could be very small. It could be very broad. And that would be, it sounds to me, if I'm based on what the city manager was just saying, within the council's discretion at the time of goal setting. Yes?
Councilmember Beckmeyer, as I'm reading number 4 here, I think what I was trying to get at in clarifying it is there's nothing for us to prepare for consideration during goal setting. This starts off and says, prepare an item for consideration. But as you all know, the way goal setting works is you raise an idea, which is we want to start looking at reach codes for existing construction. And council says, yeah, we want to do that. And then the first step in that work plan for that goal for the 23-24 fiscal year is probably a study session like we're having tonight to talk about the possibilities for existing construction. So that, sorry to be sort of nuanced, but I felt like we wanted to be really clear about what we're saying in number 4.
Right. So with that said, my answer to that question is yes.
So what really is being said, if all of the council agrees, is that reach codes for existing construction will be on the table for council to talk about during goal setting, whether to take that up during the following fiscal year. But we're not going to include it in this package of building code and reach code upgrades to adopt before December.
Right.
And City Manager Woodhouse, I imagine you would expect me to come to the goal setting with, a number of considerations identified that would assess the potential level of effort, depending if it's a small or large, level of interest from the council or an expansive or minimal interest in existing building reach codes, because we need to understand, right, to use the graphic in the last goal setting, is it a big ball or a little ball?
That's exactly right.
That we're fitting in the box. And so we need to come to the goal setting as staff with some of those considerations so the council can shape, the size of that work plan item when prioritizing.
That's right, because as Mayor Pro Tem Big Stick mentioned, if it's going to involve, community roundtable discussions and a lot of education and outreach and multiple community workshops and stuff, it's a big ball.
If it's, just tackling, water heater replacements, that's perhaps a smaller ball than a major, threshold for remodels to be new construction, for example.
Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Badala.
And specifically, when I have been having conversations with PCE staff about existing construction reach codes, I think, and Blake, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the example that is used frequently is the heat pumps, and how the heat pumps specifically are kind of the lowest of hanging fruit when it comes to existing construction in terms of, you can replace the old one upon its burnout at virtually no additional cost, and it would be and Councilmember Vadalaus disagrees.
Sorry.
No, and frankly, I favor conversation. So there's 3 of us, and I'm okay talking with you in real time rather than doing the wait thing if you want to respond. Go ahead.
No, you finish.
Okay, and I have an expert here too, and to correct me if I'm remembering the wrong thing. But that's kind of my understanding going into it. And so, I'm perfectly comfortable appending something that's that obvious onto the reach codes, existing reach codes we're about to do. But to my mind, I think it would be a better idea to actually suss out what all of our options are instead of just the low-hanging fruit, to see if there's a package we can put together of things that are relatively simple to introduce to the community that are not of a contentious nature, or even a best case scenario. For me, finding middle ground is always the preferred way to go. I love to reach for the stars, but realistically, if I can find a happy medium, that's always my goal. So all that being said, I feel like I'm going to be bringing it up at goal setting, regardless of whether there's consensus now. I feel like this way, it gives staff the opportunity to, if they have that half a moment of leisure time where they're doing nothing else, which never happens in our city, but to then look at what, a handful of possibilities are that they can throw at us when goal setting time comes, so that my ignorant, yeah, we should do a thing might be followed up by, well, do you really want to do that? Or, yes, that's not the worst idea in the world, et cetera.
Does our community really want to do it? Right, there's that part.
Well, I'm hearing already tonight that it sounds like our community, at least a substantial chunk, is interested in following up also. So for that reason, I'd be bringing it up to begin with.
Go ahead, Sue.
So the community that spoke tonight,
right,
that were not from Pacifica?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, some of those who spoke tonight were from Pacifica, and I'm saying a substantial chunk, not all of.
Okay, that was a small chunk in my opinion, and to install a new heat pump is a huge ball, not a small ball, because it requires so much work to do even one burnout item. I have a gas stove. To put in an electric stove, I have to rerun my electric service. I may have to, I told you I have a new service, but my service maybe can't handle it. So now I have to put in a new service. Then that requires other things. So some of the burnouts in the studies have ended up costing $40,000 or $50,000 for one burnout item. I mean, if you watched Half Moon Bay, it was really interesting because some of the people who were totally in favor of the burnout ordinance totally switched in the end and decided that it just wasn't feasible to do. And the equity issue there, because you want somebody who's barely making it and living with 20 people in their house trying to make it, and then you tell them their stove goes out and they can't buy a gas stove and it's going to cost them $40,000 or $50,000. What happens there? There's a huge amount involved in that.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's important that we have a discussion.
I agree.
Have all that information out on the table and everybody can understand it, including myself. I need to learn way more.
Frankly, that's why I think that it bears discussion, because having watched what Half Moon Bay did, knowing what San Mateo just did, I think that we have an opportunity to see what our version looks like. Not what Half Moon Bay's version looks like, not even what San Mateo's version looks like. I want some facts in front of me. I want to see what options are, and I want to see if we can put together something that takes us one more step in that direction, maybe even 2 steps in that direction, but certainly not to begin a marathon, to see if we can take ourselves a little further on the journey.
I think you're all jumping the gun, because this is just a discussion of, are you going to put it on the work plan? And you have a council member yet to be elected to decide for them to give input. You know what I mean? So I think this is something to be talked about in March when you have your goal setting.
Very good.
Can we get back to the topic we're supposed to be talking about?
Well, I believe that is the topic. If I'm not correct, Mike, I think what we're talking about is item number 4 on the questions to be answered tonight.
And basically what we're saying is we're not going to talk about existing construction right now, existing buildings.
Yeah, my opinion
is about what we're not talking about, Mike.
No, I mean, my opinion is that, it's a whole huge discussion item with no facts or anything in front of it that needs to be talked about, and separately.
Exactly. Okay, how's that? Do you have enough to go on now, Christian?
That's terrific from my perspective. I want to confirm City Manager Woodhouse feels the same. Well, thank you, Council. This was certainly a very informative and helpful study session for me. I'm sure Blake and Myra feel the same.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for all the presentations. Thank you, the community.
Good night.
Good night.